Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, what did Phil Bryant really know about the welfare fraud scandal? Investigative journalist Anna Wolfe talks with 12 News about the former governor's text messages with key players in the case, including former NFL star Brett Favre. And editorial cartoonist and editor-at-large Marshall Ramsey from MississippiToday.org joins us. We'll talk with him about state politics and much more. That's all ahead this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. An investigation of Mississippi's welfare fraud scandal has uncovered evidence of former Governor Phil Bryant's ties to some of the key players. Those players include Pro Football Hall of Famer Brett Favre. The reporter who uncovered this evidence for MississippiToday.org, Anna Wolfe, spoke with 12 News late last week about her ongoing investigation of this case. Here she is with my colleagues Walt Grayson and Melanie Christopher.
Remind people about what's at the heart of this case, the millions in public welfare funds that were redirected to profitable aims.
Yeah, so the money that we're talking about here comes from a federal fund called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which can be used in flexible ways, but it says in the name, it's supposed to help needy families. And in this overarching scheme at the Department of Human Services, auditors found that $77 million was misspent here. And to give you some perspective, this is enough money to have provided rent, electricity, childcare, transportation, diapers, and 8 meals a day to 2,600 families, to give you some perspective. Almost 8,000 people could have, really benefited from this money.
Now, one of the people that received some of the money was former NFL quarterback and Mississippi native Brett Favre, and you were able to get a vast amount of text messages between Favre and some of the key players in the scandal, as well as former Governor Phil Bryant. So what'd you find out?
So Brett Favre was investing in and trying to promote this pharmaceutical company called Prevacus that said it was developing a treatment for concussions. When the company was getting desperate for more funding, Brett Favre went to the governor and he offered the governor stock in the company in exchange for his help during his last year in office. They met, including with the owner of the company, and 2 days later, they got in touch with a woman named Nancy New. This is a woman who was running a nonprofit that was receiving tens of millions of dollars from the state welfare agency. She was supposed to be running, family stabilizing programs to help the low-income population. And a week later, Nancy New struck a deal with Prevacus, this company, to give them almost $2 million in these federal grant funds. And this was happening completely behind closed doors. Prosecutors now say that that transaction was embezzlement, and Nancy New has been arrested. The company's owner and Brett Favre both told the governor over the course of the next couple months and on separate occasions that they were working with and receiving funding from the welfare officials. And the governor would respond with things like, sounds good, or great report, we will get this done. So over that year, Bryant also helped them find different investors and connect with the FDA. When Bryant left office in 2020, the company's owner texted the outgoing governor, I'd like to give you a company package for all your help. And Phil Bryant said, sounds good, where would you like to meet? It wasn't until the people who were arrested in this case, wasn't until the arrests that, and Prevacus was named in the indictments, that Phil Bryant ended his arrangement with the company.
Anna, once you reviewed these documents, and all this is just eye-opening, really, you were able to secure an interview with former Governor Bryant. You two spoke for, I understand, about 3 hours. What did he have to say?
So we were kind of going back and forth over these text messages, right? Like trying to, fill in some context and get his take on what they said. And, I pressed him on the people in this case. Brett Favre and the owner of this company told you that they were receiving public funds, and they were also talking about giving you stock in the company after you left office. Help me figure this out. And his explanation was that he did not read his text messages carefully enough to appreciate that this company was receiving public funds, even though that's what the text messages that he responded to said. He also said that he never intended to accept stock in the company, even though the messages show that he was moving in that direction until the arrests derailed the arrangement.
So what is the status of the official investigation into this scandal, and what's the state doing, and what about the feds? What are they doing?
So Brett Favre was also trying to get money for the volleyball stadium at USM that was also paid for with welfare funds. And we think that that might come up in the civil litigation that DHS is planning to file against people who received the money improperly. So we're kind of waiting on seeing what happens with that civil litigation. And as far as the federal authorities are concerned, we don't know what they're doing right now. They move very quietly, but slowly, but we're hoping that the reporting spurs them to action.
The 2022 legislative session came to an end with multi-billion-dollar spending plans locked in place. We'll recap the final days and talk with Marshall Ramsey about session highlights when Mississippi Insight continues. The 2022 session of Mississippi legislature is over, but lawmakers failed to restore a ballot initiative process to Mississippi voters. They focused the last days of the session last week on spending plans. They had been scheduled to wrap Sunday, but continue through Tuesday. Their spending plans included allocations of $1.5 billion in American Rescue Plan funding. That's the bulk of the ARPA spending package sent to the states to help recover from the pandemic. State spending itself can do about $7.3 billion. That's an unprecedented level of public spending in Mississippi. Still, lawmakers will once again shortchange the Mississippi Adequate Education Plan. Teacher pay raises are set, but operating money budgeted will not keep up with the school district's costs for inflation. Mississippi now waits to see the ultimate impact of the state's largest tax cut ever. Governor Tate Reeves signed that measure into law. 12 News' Anthony Howard attended the signing ceremony and filed this report.
House Bill 531 is now law.
Republicans and Governor Reeves are calling this a win for all Mississippians.
We've brought in billions of dollars more than initially projected. Our economy is dynamic, and our economy has fueled growth, and reducing taxes on hardworking Mississippians will further drive economic development in our state and help our people continue to put food on the table.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the state population has steadily decreased since 2016. Lawmakers predict this tax cut will be the solution.
It positions us to be competitive in attracting young people and retaining our citizens. It also makes us competitive in trying to attract new jobs and industry. We can now go out and market ourselves as having the 5th best marginal tax rate in the country.
Lawmakers who oppose the elimination believe eliminating the income tax will create a nearly $500 million deficit in state revenue.
This is the tax bill that was signed today, what we expect is it'll create a $525 million recurring hole in our budget every year. And this is done in the face of a state that's the poorest state arguably in the country, the lowest per capita income in the country.
According to the Mississippi Department of Revenue, the income tax makes up about 34% of the general fund in a fiscal year. Last year's income tax awarded the state over $2.2 billion.
We originally talked about cutting the grocery tax, which would have been great. We needed to do that. But we also talked about cutting people's car tags, which is a big expense. In a state that doesn't have a lot of mass transit and people drive every day, they have to have cars. So anything we could have done to reduce that burden, we should have. We didn't do any of that.
Contenders of House Bill 531 feel the new law does too little for low-income and working-class citizens, only saving them a few hundreds as opposed to corporations and the 1% who will see the bulk of the nearly $500 million projected to be returned to taxpayers.
That's Anthony Howard reporting. We'll talk more about the 2022 session with Marshall Ramsey when Mississippi Insight continues. If you keep up with Marshall Ramsey's work, you know just how much work he churns out on a weekly basis. Ramsey is the popular editorial cartoonist and editor-at-large for MississippiToday.org. Well, we caught up with him last week and talked about his observations during a very busy legislative session. Well, a couple of very interesting developments out of this session as it ends. There's that tax cut bill the House and Senate negotiators finally hammered out, and then the lawmakers' decision to raise salaries of state officials. You hit two birds with one stone with this cartoon depicting the three most powerful men in the state, Speaker Gunn, Lieutenant Governor Hoseman, and Governor Reeves. They all benefit somewhat politically and financially from these separate items, but you don't always see these men together like this, do you?
Well, there was a little kumbaya moment, I suppose, when everybody's getting a raise and so forth. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm not terribly bent out of shape that the governor now makes a little bit more than, an average CEO would make or whatever. But my point on the whole deal was, that tax cut's going to help them out a lot now when they get that big bump in pay. One thing that's interesting, though, I want to make sure people are clear about this. They actually have to win re-election and then they get the raise. So they don't get it immediately. I think it's just down the road, but still they get a big raise. And what's funny is that a lot of the lawmakers are bent out of shape because they didn't get a raise, and so it's like, well, why didn't we get one and you got one? So it just, that's what makes my job so much easy. It's so easy.
Yeah. Back on March 28th, you put the governor squarely on the back of the three when it came to influencing tax cut negotiators. Why'd you do so?
Yeah, he was really quiet this session. He wasn't around too much. And it's so weird because, as lieutenant governor, he had so much power and really dictated so much. But instead, he was more present, I guess, on social media than he was actually in the Capitol itself. And so at the last minute, he kind of poked his nose under the tent and said, hey, I'm going to get in on this. And that way I can use it for my election. So basically what I drew him is I had him on the tax cut chopper, which is a little play on words, and then had him being behind in the kiddie cart because he really came in at the last moment.
Yeah, still a lot of concern about how the state can sustain critical public services after slashing future revenues, as lawmakers have just approved. Do you find it remarkable that the state Senate has stepped forward as the more fiscally conservative of the two chambers?
Yeah, it's Speaker Gunn really was pushing for the total elimination of the income tax. And, of course, we saw what happened in Kansas a few years ago when they did that, and it caused all kinds of issues. I think that's what a lot of people worried about. But, the Republican Party is very fascinating. There's like three different segments of it now. And so people always say, well, Marshall, why don't you draw a lot of cartoons about the Democrats in the state house? And it's like, because they don't really have enough power to make coffee. So I didn't really expect to see this kind of a battle over the tax cut. But, in a year when our revenues are really pumped up almost artificially because of all the stimulus money, you kind of hope that maybe they did pump the brakes a little bit and did a little bit of caution. And I think they did. We'll see how it turns out. I know everybody's probably glad to get a few extra bucks in their pocket.
Yeah, this was a session that really underscored the personal dynamics of legislative leaders. You captured that with this park bench meeting and sniping between Philip Gunn and Delbert Hoseman. What do you think of Speaker Gunn and his tight rein on the House?
It's fun to watch just because I came in when Tim Ford was Speaker and then Billy McCoy was Speaker. And back in those days, it was a lot different dynamic in the way the legislature worked. You had knockdown, drag-out fights in the committees. You had knockdown, drag-out fights on the floor. And here, it's almost kind of like the old Soviet days when everything is pre-decided and they pretty much vote down what they're told to do. So there's not as much drama per se, but we did end up with a little bit of drama just because the House and the Senate started butting heads a little bit. But yeah, I never thought I'd be able to put the word duty head in a cartoon. I felt like I was back in maybe third grade, but it worked.
Yeah, state officials weren't the only ones getting pay hikes this session. Teachers got a long-awaited raise that should put their salary averages a lot closer to the regional standard. How important do you think this move is to keeping qualified educators here in Mississippi?
I think it's fantastic. I have been supporting that for a long time. It's not just because my wife teaches. I'll throw that out there. She does it because it's a passion. And most teachers, to be honest with you, do teach because it's a passion. But let me tell you a quick story here. This was a while back, but I do remember one of the teaching assistants at where my wife worked at the time we went into a big box department store, and the assistant was working at the cash register for her second job. And so she would get in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning at the school that she worked at. And then she would work that second shift till about 9 o'clock at night. And you got to think that's an awfully long day. So the teachers in Mississippi work really super hard and do a great job. The levels in reading scores have been going up, and they've just gotten through the pandemic. So I thought that was one of the really positive things that came out of the session.
Also on the education front, a controversial move to pass the so-called critical race theory bill. It's a somewhat vaguely written piece of legislation that doesn't even describe what CRT is. It simply limits what teachers may say about any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. A CRT isn't even taught at K through 12 level. In your view, was this solution a search of a problem?
Yeah, I think it was a red meat bill. I think it was, like you said, there was no problem there. And it was just something that, it helps the base and gets them excited a little bit. But like you said, the bill didn't have any teeth. And the only CRT class that's being taught in the state, and I felt like that our team here did a really good job writing about it, is at a law class up at Ole Miss. So yeah, it was one thing I've discovered, and I mean, I love my political friends. I love my politician friends. They're fantastic folks. But sometimes it's a lot easier to solve a problem that doesn't exist than it is to solve one that does.
You're like a lot of Americans who are watching often with horror all the news and images coming from Russia's war with Ukraine. Some of your recent work is devoted to that subject and how the war is impacting us at the gas pumps. What are your thoughts as we watch this war overseas wind up?
It's been horrific. I'm a huge fan and student of World War II, and some of the atrocities that we're seeing now on our television screen are so similar to some of the death and destruction we saw not only in Europe but also in the Pacific as well during World War II. This is strictly Putin's war. This was his choice. He attacked a country that did nothing wrong. But Russia is the number 2 producer of oil and petroleum. And it's, Ukraine and Russia together are huge producers of wheat. So this war is going to have huge impacts on us, and it's going to affect our pocketbook. It's hard for me to get super upset about paying $3.80 something for a gallon of gas when I know that there's people in Ukraine that are literally getting their homes shelled or they're being subjected to war crimes. But still, it hurts the wallet. And, we did this a few years ago. I was trying to remember what year it was that we were paying over $4 a gallon. And, I remember when it dropped back down, it felt awfully darn good again to be paying $2.50 a gallon. And I remember complaining about $2.50 a gallon. So it's tough. I'm on the road a lot. I drive around Mississippi a lot. I think the lowest I saw going to the coast on Monday was, I don't know, 247 or something like that. So, or 347, excuse me. So I hope it's coming down a little bit. But yeah, it's tough. It hurts the average Mississippian. Obviously, people, hardworking Mississippians who, may travel up to 60, 70 miles on the way to work. So it's a tough thing. But we're in a really tough time right now. So it's tough to watch.
When you're making all of these pictures of folks, and particularly the politicians, did they respond? Are you getting reaction when you're making your images of them?
Yeah, I do hear from them, which is kind of cool. We live in a state where there's 2 degrees of separation. So you can go out to lunch on Sunday after church and run into, a person you just drew a cartoon about. Most of the folks have a really good sense of humor. There's a few of them that don't. I started with Kirk Fordyce, who screamed at me back in the day. But at the end of the day, I think he thought I was pretty good at what I did, and I respect that. Haley Barbour would back me into a corner and chew me out over policy, but he didn't care about the cartoons. He thought they were hilarious. I'm not sure that Governor Reeves much cares for it. But Delbert, of all people, has them all over his wall. He literally has up to 30 of my cartoons hanging on the wall in his office. So go figure. I'm just glad I get to do what I do in a state that's as amazing as Mississippi, because this is probably the best state on the planet for being an editorial cartoonist.
Yeah, let's wrap up with a light note here. To talk about the Coloring with Banjo and Pip series, it's a much different approach for a different audience than your editorial work, isn't it?
I started doing those coloring sheets every day for free. I put them on my social media, but I started doing them so that kids during the pandemic would have something to do if they were at home, right? But then over time, I started hearing from average people saying, Marshall, I just want to let you know, I download your coloring sheets and I color them because they're stress relievers. And then I message them back usually saying, well, I draw them because they keep me sane too. Because I tell you what, it's tough. You're in the news business. I'm in the news business. We have to keep up with every single thing that's going on out there, and it tends to grate on you. So when Banjo and Sam and Pip and Mr. ML come onto the scene, it brings me a lot of joy, but it also, if it can help a kid or help a grown-up do a little bit of stress relief, then it's worth my time.
And how can people find Coloring with Banjo and Pip?
Yeah, just find me on social media, Marshall Ramsey. I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter or on Facebook. I'd also do it on Instagram as well. Just like I said, just search for Marshall Ramsey. I pop up pretty quick.
Always a pleasure and fun talking with you.
Hey, it's so good to hear your voice, Byron. It really is.
All right, thank you for joining us, and we'll be right back. Got an idea for the show? Send us an email to news@wjtv.com. We want to hear from you. Big thanks to Marshall Ramsey and Anna Wolfe for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.